My name is Dr. Felucia. I'm a licensed psychologist, and today I'm going to be talking to you about 5 important facts to understand about spiritual abuse. The first fact, and probably the most important one, is what is spiritual abuse? How do we define it? And most simply, spiritual abuse occurs when a spiritual authority or a member of a spiritual community uses spirituality to try and take over the will of someone else. They're going to try and control them using the vehicle of spirituality. And they do this through different means. It could be through manipulation, coercion, intimidation, or just outright trying to dominate somebody. But they're using spirituality as a means to do this. And the reason why spiritual abuse is so harmful and so egregious is the first reason is that we were not created to have dominion over anybody, right? And so if we think about ourselves as humans, we all have free will and we all have autonomy, and we are not created or we're not meant to control other people. And the second reason that spiritual abuse can be so egregious and so damaging is that for many people, spirituality it's sacred. It's a refuge for them. And so when that has been tainted by spiritual abuse, people feel like they have nowhere else to turn. I'm not saying that spiritual abuse is necessarily worse than any other type of abuse, but for many people who are spiritual and who have a religion, they have a faith community, when that has been tainted, it affects everything. For some people, this is their whole life, this is their community. And so when they experience spiritual abuse, they have nowhere else to turn. They feel like they can't pray. They, every part of them has been just destroyed by this abusive, destructive system. So that's why spiritual abuse just has very many devastating effects for people that have experienced it. The second fact about spiritual abuse is that it is erosive and it takes time, and it also is developed and maintained in a system. So when people, and so that's why for many people, they may not understand or realize they've experienced spiritual abuse until after it has occurred, because it's not something that just that happens like in this one big incident. It happens over time. It can be a very subversive process, like I said, and it also is maintained by people in the system. Okay, so in order for spiritual abuse to occur, people in the spiritually abusive environment must maintain it. And oftentimes when people are experiencing spiritual abuse, they will say, yes, the leader did this, but they'll also point to members of the community that they were around, maybe people that they thought they were their friends, even people that were their own family that turned against them. And the reason this occurs, again, is because spiritual abuse needs people to maintain and uphold that structure. And that oftentimes is what happens when people in the spiritually abusive community that are not leaders perpetrate and maintain the abuse. And they do this through many ways, but most of it occurs, or I would say the most powerful way this occurs is through isolation. Right. And so when people maybe try to leave the spiritual abusive environment, they speak up for themselves, they point out something that is wrong, they are shunned by members of the community. And that is a very powerful and punitive way that spiritual abuse is maintained. And so, the first point, I define what spiritual abuse is: using spirituality to hijack or control someone's will. The second point is understanding that spiritual abuse is maintained by a system. And that system is not just the leader, it's the people in the system, okay? Think about a spiritually abusive system like a toxic family. Okay, it needs members to thrive. And so oftentimes when people talk about dysfunctional families, it's not just the parent, they're also maybe siblings and extended families that are upholding the principles and the abusive messages and systems that help that abuse continue. Okay, so the third point is that anybody is capable of falling prey to spiritual abuse. And that can be really difficult for some people to understand. Well, let me put it this way. I wouldn't say it's difficult for them to understand, but it might be difficult for them to embrace the fact that they fell prey to spiritual abuse. later they could look back and say, wow, I can't believe I fell for this. I can't believe I allowed this to happen. But the point is, anybody can fall prey to spiritual abuse, and it's easy to do so. And I'm going to explain why. Well, I shouldn't say it's easy, but it's easier than we think. And I'm going to explain why we fall prey to spiritual abuse. The first one is we tend to assume benevolent intentions of our spiritual leaders, maybe even before they've earned that trust, right? We are quick to trust people in authority, and especially spiritual authority, because of the spirituality that comes with it. We tend to associate spirituality with good things. And so we see a leader, we see someone who's spiritual, we assume wonderful things about them that maybe aren't true. Another thing that I've talked about in some of my other videos is something known as the halo effect. And so because somebody is in a spiritual position, we assume all these good things about them that may not necessarily be true. And just to backtrack a little bit, what the halo effect is seeing one positive thing about somebody and then assuming a lot of other positive things about them that may or may not be true. And we tend to have this halo effect with spiritual leaders. If you think about a spiritual scandal that's come out, and they interview people on the news, you'll hear people say things like, oh, I can't believe that this happened. I can't believe this person was capable of this. And it's because of what we tend to assume about spiritual leaders, okay? Another reason why it's easy for us to fall prey to spiritual abuse is because spirituality in and of itself is not a tangible construct, right? It's abstract. We can't measure spirituality like we do our height, right? Or growth or level of water. You can't, it's not quantifiable. And so because spirituality in and of itself is abstract, we tend to look for things that indicate spirituality, right? And so when we think about these spiritually abusive leaders, on the surface, they tend to be very charismatic, very charming. They do a lot of the outward things that we associate with good spiritual people. And so we're likely to overlook things because we see, wow, this person is so charming, or, they pray so well, or they're so caring and hospitable to people in the community, or they say the right spiritual words that really stir in our souls. And so because we're looking for those tangible things, we may overlook deeper character issues that nobody really is going to be able to tell unless they spend a lot of time with that person and they've seen them under really challenging circumstances. Okay. The fourth fact about spiritual abuse is that spiritual abuse devalues people in favor of traditions and institutions, okay? So in these environments, upholding the structure, upholding a good public face and a good reputation is way more important than the health and the wholeness of the individual people as part of that system, okay? And the fifth fact is that spiritual abuse, or spiritually abusive environments rather, favor the leaders over the people, right? And so, I've heard of situations where people will bring up something that a spiritually abusive leader did. Maybe they were involved in a scandal and they want justice done. And they're told, well, think about how that leader would feel. They're very sorry for what they did. We need to keep this under wraps. The focus is always on the leader as opposed to the people that have been hurt. And so in a situation like this, let's say, a spiritually abusive leader, swindled the congregation out of a lot of money or something, and people are trying to get justice for this. A way that this principle is put into action, and the principle I'm talking about is the leader over the people, is the people that have been affected would be encouraged not to say anything or just let it go because the leader feels sad and the leader is sorry. But this is neglecting the people who have been hurt by this leader, right? What about the money they've lost? What about just the losses and the negative effects that they've sustained, okay? So I'm going to go over those 5 facts again. The first fact is that spiritual abuse occurs when anybody uses their spirituality to try and control, manipulate, or dominate someone else. The second one is that spiritual abuse needs a system to maintain it, okay? And that system is often other people in the spiritually abusive environment. They don't have to be leaders, but they use certain things, especially shame and isolation, to control other people, trying to, keep everybody in line because they also want favor and respect and admiration from the leader. Okay. The third fact is that anybody is capable of falling prey to spiritual abuse, and it is much easier than we think. Okay. And that's because we tend to give trust and assume good intentions about leaders before or in spite of the fact that they deserve it, right? They may not be deserving of that trust, right? They may not have done things that necessarily warrant that level of trust or us believing very good things about them, but it happens because of what we tend to associate with leadership and with spirituality. We just tend to assume good things, right? And then the other thing is that spirituality, another reason why we tend to fall prey to spiritual abuse is because we are looking for tangibles because spirituality is abstract, okay? The fourth fact is that spiritual abuse tends to maintain institutions, traditions, appearance over the health and wholeness of the members. And the fifth one is that spiritually abusive environments tend to favor the leader over the people. Okay. And, keep in mind that in every spiritual environment, people are going to have disagreements. Not everyone is going to see things the same way. This is not spiritual abuse. Okay. In healthy spiritual environments, there are going to be rules. There are going to be expectations that people are expected to adhere to. There are going to be hierarchies. There's leadership and authority, but it's not done with the intention, or the system doesn't exist to subjugate the people in there and control them. That's the difference. Think about it this way. In healthy families, the rules, right? People disagree. There are authority figures, but in those systems, people are not using their authority or their position in that family to subjugate or control somebody else, right? And in spiritually abusive environments, manipulation, intimidation, shame, and control, those are weapons that are used to try and maintain order and authority, okay? And people's free will is looked at as a threat, not as a basic right. So these are just 5 important facts to remember about spiritual abuse. I have several other videos on this channel about spiritual abuse that I hope that you look at, and so you can gain more understanding about how spiritual abuse works. If you or someone who is a loved one is experiencing any abuse, please get help right away. I have resources in the description box for that. And I also have you can also schedule a consultation with me on my website, skillsetcounseling.com. And there's also a link in the description box for you to book a free consultation with me to, discuss this process and discuss how you can recover from spiritual abuse. Okay. May you have a wonderful and a peaceful day. Bye-bye.